I caught my wife cheating with her boss, unveiled the truth, took revenge, and left her forever. Cindy met and fell in love with Rick Thomas during her freshman year of college. He was funny, energetic, and always knew how to make her laugh and feel special. They enjoyed long Sunday walks and sneaking into empty campus buildings to talk for hours. Rick was both handsome and kind, qualities Cindy's parents and his family appreciated. His sister Kathy once joked, "If he ever breaks up with you, we'll definitely miss him." By his last semester, Rick secured a job with a big investment firm on the West Coast, while Cindy earned her teaching degree and found a job in Orange County. To celebrate, Rick took her to dinner in San Clemente and proposed with a beautiful ring that belonged to his grandmother. Cindy tearfully accepted, and the surrounding diners applauded. 9 years later, Cindy, now 32, had twins, Michael and Sarah, and was teaching 7th grade math. Tired of the low pay and long hours, she decided to leave her job. She managed to find a new career path within 5 months, thanks to her college best friend, Kelly. Kelly was a free spirit, always dragging Cindy into adventures. One day, Kelly invited Cindy to be her date for her boss's wedding in Napa. After discussing it with Rick, who encouraged her to go, Cindy agreed. At the wedding, Cindy watched Kelly dance with a much younger groomsman and chatted with a bride's cousin, Sally, who remarked on the need for a good event coordinator. This comment sparked an idea in Cindy. Within 6 months, she started her event management company, We Plan, You Play, utilizing her organizational skills. 2 years later, Cindy's business thrived, especially with destination weddings on the California coast. That's when Cindy met Bennett Davis, who owned 3 upscale boutique hotels perfect for destination weddings in San Diego, Santa Barbara, and the Monterey Peninsula. At 26, Bennett bought a rundown mansion in Santa Barbara, working tirelessly to open it on time and under budget. Despite initial slow growth, he reached profitability by the 4th year. He then expanded, opening hotels in San Diego and Monterey over the next 5 years. 14 years later, Bennett was still dedicated to his business, but also enjoyed fine wines, dancing, and socializing. Known as a CBNA, a confirmed bachelor but not a prick, he treated people fairly and was clear about not seeking long-term relationships. He was content with his life. About months before a significant event, Bennett and his manager, Lori Templeton, attended a hospitality industry convention in Los Angeles. There, they encountered Cindy Thomas at her We Plan, You Play exhibit. Bennett was impressed by Cindy's presentation, intrigued by her bright blue eyes. They had a minute conversation where Bennett asked both professional and personal questions, gauging her experience and personality. Cindy, wearing a wedding ring, answered enthusiastically, appreciating Bennett's mix of professionalism and lightheartedness. Lori observed Bennett's genuine interest in Cindy. At the end of their talk, Bennett invited Cindy to dinner, but she declined, mentioning her family. Instead, they planned for Cindy to visit his Santa Barbara hotel for lunch and a tour the following week. Cindy's visit went exceptionally well. She arrived early and visited the nearby Old Mission before meeting Bennett and Lori. The valet warmly welcomed her, and she was pleased with the hospitality. As she approached the hotel lobby, she saw Bennett dressed sharply in a light-colored suit and a dark blue shirt, which highlighted his strong features and dark eyes. Cindy rarely noticed other men besides Rick, whom she considered gorgeous. However, Bennett Davis, who owned 3 boutique hotels in San Diego, Santa Barbara, and the Monterey Peninsula, caught her attention with his good looks and charisma. When they met for a tour of his Santa Barbara hotel, Bennett welcomed Cindy warmly. They shared a mutual respect for hard work and success and instantly connected. Cindy wore a stylish but modest black sundress and sandals, aware that appearances mattered in business. During the tour, Bennett impressed Cindy with his attention to detail. They enjoyed a lunch with California wildflowers and her favorite Pinot Noir. Bennett's charm was evident, but Cindy remained professional, limiting her wine intake to focus on business. After lunch, they toured the hotel, and Cindy impressed Bennett with her knowledge of the property's history. They laughed and discussed potential partnerships for hosting weddings and family reunions. When it was time to leave, Bennett warmly shook Cindy's hand, holding it a bit longer than usual, and kissed her cheek. Cindy felt a surprising connection to Bennett, but reminded herself of her commitment to Rick and their children. Driving home, she found a book her daughter had left in the car, bringing her back to reality. Cindy chastised herself for entertaining thoughts about Bennett and resolved to stay focused on her family and career. Back at the hotel, Bennett settled some business matters before retiring to his room to rest before his evening beach run. Lying on his bed, he thought about the day, and especially about Cindy. Unlike other beautiful women he had dated, Cindy stood out for her inner and outer beauty. She was married, but he couldn't stop thinking about her. At the same time, Rick was at home cooking dinner with their kids, Michael and Sarah. He felt blessed to have Cindy in his life. When she arrived, they had dinner together, and Sarah shared a story about playing with the neighbor's cat. After the kids were in bed, Cindy made love to Rick, perhaps to reassure herself. Over the next months, Cindy organized 4 weddings at Winfield Scott. Bennett's subtle touches and frequent visits made an impact on her. Rick only accompanied her once early on when Bennett was away. One night after a successful wedding, Cindy and Lori shared a leftover glass of Pinot Noir on the patio. Lori, taking off her shoes, said, "Can we talk?" Cindy agreed. Lori expressed concern for Cindy, noting that Bennett was attracted to her and might pursue her if given the chance. She warned Cindy that getting involved with Bennett could ruin her marriage and that Bennett wouldn't settle down with her. Cindy, moved to tears, admitted her confusion. She loved Rick deeply and couldn't imagine hurting him, but Bennett's allure was hard to resist. Lori's gaze was firm but caring as she advised Cindy to consider her family's well-being over her attraction to Bennett. Cindy was left grappling with her feelings, knowing the potential consequences. Cindy took a few sips of champagne, pausing to gather her thoughts. Lori let her take her time, knowing Cindy needed to process everything on her own. "I've never felt restricted in my life. I fell for Rick quickly but always felt in control. With Bennett, I feel out of control. If the moment came, I think I'd give in," Cindy admitted. 6 months ago, I would have been offended at the idea of being unfaithful, but now I'm struggling. Marriage is a commitment both ways, and I can't imagine Rick with someone else. Why am I even considering this? "What will you do?" Lori asked gently. 80% of me wants to stay true to Rick and the kids. This is a great business deal, and I want to maintain professionalism, but 20% of me thinks I can have a fling, get it out of my system, and move on," Cindy confessed, tears in her eyes. Lori hugged her and offered support. The next day, Lori confronted Bennett. "If you pursue Cindy, I'll quit. I've worked with you for 7 years and I'll know," she warned, leaving his office without waiting for a response. 3 weeks later, a sudden rainstorm disrupted an outdoor wedding. Cindy and Lori worked tirelessly to salvage the event. Late at night, Cindy and Bennett found themselves alone. Bennett comforted Cindy, telling her she had done her best despite the weather. Cindy, feeling vulnerable, leaned into him. They kissed, and Bennett made it clear he wouldn't push her into anything. Cindy, however, gave in to her desires. They spent the night together, discussing how to keep their affair secret. Cindy assured Bennett she could handle it without arousing suspicion. She left early in the morning, wanting to rest before returning to her family. Bennett cleaned up and went to sleep. When Cindy arrived home Sunday afternoon, her children, Sarah and Michael, ran to greet her with hugs and stories about their weekend. She hadn't been home since Friday lunch but was welcomed with joy. "Daddy took us to the big kiddie park yesterday, and we went down the giant slide. Ralph is back, and Mrs. Bowling brought us cookies. Daddy made Mickey Mouse pancakes for breakfast and said we might go to Disneyland next week. Mommy, did Daddy ever take you on rides?" Cindy winced at the mention of Daddy and rides, recalling her recent affair. She mentally shook off the guilt. As she saw Rick looking fit in his shorts and t-shirt hugging him, she said, "Hi, baby. It was a rough wedding. I'm glad to be home. How are the twins?" "We missed you, Cinderella, but I love weekends with the kids. I'm glad your business is thriving. I saw the storm on the news and knew you'd be busy. Let me get you a glass of wine and rub your feet." Son of a cow, she thought. Loving kid supporting me, I can't lose him. Later, they moved to the hot tub with wine, but Rick, exhausted, asked to skip it. Cindy agreed, hiding her relief. On Monday, Rick suggested a date night for Tuesday, and she eagerly agreed. Early Tuesday, Rick packed for both of them and left a note. "Dress for your Cinderella date and be ready by 4 p.m. At 4, they left the kids with Kelly and drove to the Ritz-Carlton at Dana Point. Cindy was stunned. "Is Kelly staying the night?" "Yes. I didn't bring clothes. You have a bag in the trunk. Kelly checked it while you bathed the kids. You let her in my underwear drawer?" "Yes. She found something and said not to worry. She'll take you lingerie shopping." Idiot. They walked on the beach, had a great dinner, and talked on the balcony. At midnight, Rick shared he was up for a partnership, meaning more money and less travel. He even mentioned joining her on some wedding weekends. In the dark, Cindy's troubled face went unnoticed. She quickly recovered, praising him. At breakfast in bed, they continued. Cindy reassured Rick she wouldn't quit her business, and he supported her fully. "You're amazing at what you do," he said. "How did I find such an amazing guy?" she thought. "I can't screw this up." She resolved to keep her affair with Bennett discreet. Despite her lack of guilt, she couldn't foresee the impending tragedy. Cindy believed she could juggle everything without hurting anyone, convinced that Bennett would eventually move on and she would remain with her family. She never imagined how wrong she could be. The next month, Rick was promoted to partner. Cindy had a wedding at a San Diego hotel and discussed securing their affair with Bennett. She had been on birth control since starting her business because she and Rick agreed 2 kids were enough. In late June, things began to unravel. Cindy and Bennett were in his office discussing new business terms when Lori entered. "I need to talk to you both," Lori said, seating herself. "Bennett, remember our conversation 4 months ago? I said if you two were dating, I'd leave." Cindy was shocked. Bennett stayed calm. "I saw you kiss and go to bed the night of the storm. It was heartbreaking. You're acting selfishly, ignoring the consequences. I started job hunting the next Monday, and will move to Austin in August to work for an event management company." Turning to Cindy, Lori said, "I warned you. This will hurt your family. Rick doesn't deserve this. I won't let this affect our professional relationship, but only talk to me about work from now on." She left the room, and Cindy and Bennett sat in silence. Cindy eventually said, "Bennett, I'm going home. I'm sorry for all of this. I'll call you in a few days." She drove to Orange County, checked into a Marriott, and cried herself to sleep after buying a bottle of Maker's Mark. Lori kept her promise and moved to Austin after working her last 2 weeks. Bennett didn't try to stop her. Cindy wanted to call Lori but settled for a text. "I'm sorry my actions hurt you. You warned me, but I can't let it go unaddressed." By early September, Cindy and Bennett's relationship was strained by guilt, but their attraction remained. By October, they resumed their affair. One Saturday night, after a late wedding, they took Bennett's BMW to a secluded chalet on the Pacific coast. "Oh my God, this is gorgeous," Cindy murmured, cuddling Bennett. Cindy had told Rick she was scouting Monterey and wouldn't be back until late Sunday. She just didn't mention she'd be with her lover. After checking out at 2 p.m., Cindy and Bennett walked on the beach and had lunch. They stopped in Big Sur for wine on their drive south. Cindy felt content, believing her business was thriving, her children were happy, and her affair was under control. In early December, Cindy coordinated a wedding at Bennett's Monterey Hotel. Rick, planning to surprise Cindy, booked a room under his name. He prepared flowers, her favorite wine, and bath oils, hoping to rekindle their connection. Unbeknownst to Cindy, Rick was already there. Rick waited until after the rehearsal dinner to surprise Cindy. He had spotted Bennett earlier but stayed hidden. As he searched for Cindy, he heard her voice. Moments later, he overheard her say, "Not here, please. Wait until we get back to your room." Turning the corner, Rick saw Cindy and Bennett together. Cindy, seeing Rick, screamed, "Rick, what?" Bennett stepped back in shock. Rick, heartbroken, fell to his knees. Cindy, realizing the gravity of her actions, sobbed and tried to console him. Rick, consumed by pain and anger, demanded, "Why?" As Cindy tried to explain, Rick stood up, anger building. "No, Cindy, don't talk to me. Take her to your room, Bennett. She's all yours." He turned to leave, rejecting Cindy's attempts to reach out. "Don't touch me," Rick shouted. "You were everything to me, and now you've ruined us. Just go away with your stud and leave me alone." Cindy couldn't fight the only common sense she'd shown in a year. She let Rick go, knowing this wasn't the time to try to explain or comfort him. She had broken his heart and needed to leave him alone. Shocked herself, she asked Bennett to leave her alone, then returned to her room. Lying on her bed, she tried to calm her racing heart, horrified by the mess she had created. Rick, meanwhile, sat at his desk for an hour, struggling to think. Realizing he couldn't stay there any longer, he decided to go home, arriving. Early Sunday morning, he planned to shower and change at his office before facing Mrs. Bowling and the kids. Before leaving, he wrote Cindy a note and left it on the table. "Cindy, I'm going home to the kids. You broke my heart and soul. I need time to think. When you get home, email me first. I'll leave before you arrive. Don't contact me otherwise. I can't trust you anymore. I loved you with all my heart, and now I hate you for what you've done." Bennett found Rick gone and the note on the table. He cursed himself for not being more cautious, and felt powerless to help Cindy. He placed the note on her bedside table and stood guard outside her room. Cindy woke at 6 a.m., exhausted from emotional turmoil. She washed her face, cried, and then saw the note. She read it and collapsed, sobbing. Bennett came in, knelt beside her, and held her. Though tempted to blame Bennett, she knew their affair was a mutual choice. She remembered Lori's warnings and knew she wasn't a sufferer. Cindy had made her choices and now had to live with the consequences. "I'll go home as soon as I can pull myself together, Bennett. I have to face this," Cindy said. "I know, Cindy. I wish things were different. You're an amazing woman and friend. If I could fix this, I would." "Just know I'm always here for you," Bennett replied. "Thank you, Bennett. I hope this doesn't hurt you, but we may never speak again." He hugged her tightly, like a friend, then left, telling the staff to bring her car around but to leave her alone. The staff, knowing the situation, went about their business. When Cindy was 15 minutes from home, she texted Rick, "Can we talk when the kids are asleep? It's all my fault, but I hope we can find a way out." Rick replied, "Cinderella, I've already fed the kids. This is our last contact until I reach out to you. Please honor my request." She wept, realizing the name Cinderella might never be used by him again. She was no longer his loving wife, but someone who had deeply betrayed him. At the end of the longest week of her life, Rick called. She answered immediately, hopeful. "Hi, Rick. I'm glad you called." Rick, steady but emotional, said, "I'll be home around tonight. I'll try to act normal around the kids for a few hours, then sleep in the spare room. We won't talk until tomorrow morning. Is that okay?" "Yes, Rick," Cindy said quietly. "When can we talk?" "We'll have Mrs. Bowling babysit Sunday afternoon. We'll find a secluded spot in the park to talk. We should spend Saturday with the kids, as we might not have many more days together." His words, "if at all," hit her like a punch. She agreed, saying only, "Okay, honey." Rick replied, "Please don't call me with affectionate names again. We are adults in a nightmare. Don't claim love or affection for me again." He hung up, leaving Cindy in tears. They managed through Friday's pizza and movie night, even laughing a little. Saturday was similar, with efforts to appear normal. The hardest moment was a group hug on the beach, where Cindy saw the dead look in Rick's eyes. Sunday morning was spent in pajamas over pancakes. Rick told the kids that Mom and Dad were going out and Mrs. Bowling would watch them. The kids were disappointed but accepted it. At the park, they found a quiet spot to talk. Rick sat across from Cindy, facing the park, always wanting to see if trouble was coming. "I'd like you to speak first if you don't mind," Rick began. "If I speak first, I might not control my words. I promise I won't interrupt you. Take as much time as you need. Please start whenever you're ready." Cindy felt this was like a negotiation, but since it was her fault, she let Rick lead. "Of course," she replied. "I don't know where to start, Rick. I've thought about this since last Friday," she began, omitting the painful details. "You deserve the truth. I've been in a physical relationship with Bennett for almost 8 months." Rick lowered his head but gestured for her to continue. "Before meeting him, I'd never been attracted to anyone else. I didn't seek him out because of anything lacking in our relationship. While I didn't pursue him, I didn't resist his friendship and flirting. I realized early on that I was attracted to him. The first time we were together, he made sure I wanted it as much as he did. No one forced me. I'm not a sufferer. Everything that happened was my choice." She paused, then added, "I love you, Rick, but I hid part of my heart from you for months. You may not have noticed, but a part of me was with Bennett. I lied to you and myself, thinking everything would be okay. Deception starts with yourself. I betrayed you and everything I care about. I don't know how this will end, but I know it will hurt our children too. I am deeply ashamed of what I did." Rick bowed his head and cried, overwhelmed with despair and grief. Cindy watched him, realizing the enormity of what she had taken from him. After minutes, he finally spoke, his voice confident but barely above a whisper. "Cindy, I don't know if this is our last conversation as husband and wife. I appreciate that you didn't disrespect me by saying it was just a mistake. I thank you for being honest, but I guess I'll never really know." Cindy lowered her head in despair, knowing his words were true, and feeling the deep pain of her actions. She resisted the urge to look at him as he continued. "You've been seeing Bennett behind my back for months. I trusted you completely, but now I can't anymore. Cinderella is dead, and there's no Prince Charming to save us. I've never felt hopeless before, and I hate it. I'm not divorcing you now or anytime soon because of our children. Divorce is worse for them than loss, but I can't pretend we're the same for the next years until they graduate. I can't look at you or act like we're okay. I feel stuck and hopeless. I'm seeing a psychologist this week to find a way to cope." Cindy looked up, but Rick quickly added, "I'm not doing this for you or our marriage. It's for my sanity and to keep loving our children." Cindy asked, "Where should we stay? A hotel or an apartment?" Rick replied, "We'll stay in the house for now. I'll take an overnight business trip weekly, and you can continue your work weekends. What you do then is your choice. I'm not taking care of you now. If you prefer Bennett, go ahead." "Rick, I'm not going to," Cindy protested. Rick raised his hand to stop her. "Please stop. You're acting like I care about what you do. I need to not care about you, just as you've not cared about me for the past 8 months. Maybe a psychologist can help me protect myself better. Until then, you're on your own." They sat for half an hour, crying without touching or comforting each other. Lori's warning had come true. The consequences were unbearable for Cindy, and it was only the beginning. For the next month, they pretended everything was normal for the kids. They attended Sarah's soccer games and Michael's karate lessons convincingly. Even Miss Snyder at the parent-teacher conferences noticed nothing wrong. But behind closed doors, it was different. Cindy wanted to talk, and Rick struggled to keep from falling apart. Cindy took responsibility for her actions, but it didn't lessen Rick's betrayal and humiliation. He told the kids he had overnight business trips, using that time to think and plan. He realized he would need long-term psychological help if this continued. Rick, a new partner at his firm, excelled in analytics, evaluating investment risks and opportunities. He now applied that thinking to his personal life, weighing the pros and cons of staying with Cindy. He considered the children's well-being, the firm's view of his family commitment, and the financial implications of either staying or divorcing. He also pondered Cindy's feelings and her business. He realized there was a third radical option that might be best for everyone. It would be difficult to implement but could work. On the third night of his business trip, Rick sat on the Marriott courtyard patio, considering all angles of his plan. After 2 weeks, with the plan taking shape, Rick decided to have a serious talk with Cindy. He asked Mrs. Bowling to babysit and drove Cindy to the park where they first discussed her affair. At the same picnic table, they continued their conversation. Rick began, "Cindy, these past few weeks have been horrible for us both. Thank you for giving me time to think. I want to share some thoughts and then hear your response." Cindy nodded and Rick continued, "I don't want to rehash everything, especially the night I saw you with Bennett. I've told you how crushed I am. I'm not perfect, but I've always been committed to us and our kids. I've never cheated even when I flirted. I can't imagine replacing you in my heart. I thought we would grow old together. I was wrong about your commitment to us." Cindy, with longing in her eyes, pleaded, "Rick, I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I want to work hard to resolve the betrayal and stay together." Rick looked away before answering. "I know you mean it, Cindy, and I've considered it. On one hand, we might have enough acceptance and forgiveness to stay together." Cindy felt a glimmer of hope, but Rick continued, "But it's not right for me for 2 reasons. First, I can't regain your trust. I would always suspect you're meeting someone else. Second, I can't touch you as a husband without seeing the face of the man you chose over me. You wanted him, not me, and there's no way I can look at you without seeing Bennett's reflection." Cindy's shoulders slumped. She knew Rick was right and wanted to promise she'd be faithful, but she couldn't demand his trust. "I want to fight for us, Rick. Aren't we worth fighting for?" she asked. For the first time, she saw rage in his eyes and she recoiled. "Fight for us? What do you think I did every day? Working hard, moving up the career ladder, spending time with our kids, remembering what you love. That was all fighting for us. How have you fought for us, Cindy? By being with Bennett Davis? You stopped fighting 8 months ago, and now you want me to accept it and move on?" Rick took a deep breath, tears in both their eyes. "I want to ask you so many questions, Cindy, but how can I trust you? Maybe you're just sorry because you got caught. I want to go back to sharing our hearts, but that couple no longer exists. You eliminated us with your cheating and lies. We can only move forward with the best solution for everyone. I realized our night at the Ritz was after you were with Bennett. You partied with him, then came home and let me wine and dine you, thinking you were my faithful wife. I must have seemed like such a fool to you, happy to hear how proud you were of me, but no more." Cindy couldn't argue against anything, only feeling deep regret for the pain she had caused the man she had claimed to love with all her heart. He was right. He had fought for their relationship every day. She was the one who had betrayed his love. Her infidelity had been heartless to the husband she adored just a year earlier. Her infatuation, love, and selfishness had pushed all of that aside. "Are you going to divorce me, Rick?" she finally asked when she could find the words. "No, Cindy, I'm not going to divorce you, and I'm not going to stay married to you. I'm creating a solution that I think will work for everyone. It won't be without pain and loss, but I believe it's the only acceptable solution. I promise I'll explain everything to you in a few weeks. I'm not going to tell you what to do, Cindy, but I'll explain my steps, my path in detail. I'm not asking for your opinion on my choices because, quite frankly, I don't trust you to have my best interests or our children's best interests at heart. Once you understand my decisions, you can make your own. I won't try to control you." "But how will I know if you don't share that with me now?" Cindy asked, genuinely confused by the direction of the conversation. She wanted so badly to reach out and hold him, but it seemed like that would never happen again. Rick looked her straight in the eye with a calm, almost painful acceptance of fate and replied, "You'll find out." They talked for a few more minutes, Cindy gently probing for vague explanations, but he didn't budge. He was sure she would understand when the time came. "A few months ago, my friend and coworker, Lori, warned me that if we danced to his tune, the piper would eventually show up and demand payment. I guess she was right." Rick was surprised to hear that Lori knew what was going on and had tried to warn Cindy and Bennett. It only hurt him more. "So before you were having fun with Bennett, you were warned, and you didn't stop. You didn't come to me to tell me about your struggle. You just carried on." Tears were already flowing freely from his eyes. Her husband was sobbing. Cindy burst into tears again and dropped her head in her arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Rick stirred, and she thought that maybe he would come to hold her. "Please, God, let him come and hold me," she begged in her heart. Instead, he stood up and moved toward her, folding his arms across his chest. When she raised her head, he said, "The trumpeter has come and is demanding at least partial payment. Maybe someday it will be time for full payment." 2 weeks and 4 days later, Rick left for his weekly business trip, where he had time alone to sort himself out and work through his pain. He hugged and kissed his children goodbye, and it seemed to Cindy that he was a little sadder than he had been the last few days. It must be hard for him to say goodbye, even for hours, she thought. Cindy was sleeping better at night because she was taking melatonin, which helped her fight sleep at night. Rick suggested that she leave the children overnight with Mrs. Bowling and her cat, who had become almost an aunt to the children. Rick suggested that she could get a good night's sleep after a couple of glasses of wine. Cindy agreed, and Mrs. Bowling happily welcomed her young friends. At a.m., her cell phone had been ringing non-stop for minutes before she heard it, flipped it open, and picked it up. The screen flashed with the word emergency. "Hello," Cindy said, trying to force herself to wake up. "Is this Cindy Thomas, Richard Thomas's wife?" said a professional voice on the other end of the line. Cindy sat up sharply in bed. No one called him Richard. "Yes, that's her. Is everything all right?" "Excuse me, Mrs. Thomas, but let me clarify that you live at South El Camino Court, is that correct?" "Yes," she almost shouted into the receiver. "And can you tell me what kind of car your husband drives?" "A dark gray Lexus ES. Why, is something wrong?" "Mrs. Thomas, I regret to inform you that your husband was involved in an accident on California Highway, west of the Pacific Crest Trailhead near Warner Springs." "Oh no, my goodness," Cindy exclaimed. "Is he all right? Is he in the hospital or in an ambulance?" "I'm very sorry to inform you, Mrs. Thomas, but the accident turned out to be fatal. I don't know any other details, but his body is being transported to the University of California Medical Center in San Diego and should arrive there within the hour. I'm sorry for your loss." Cindy was stunned and couldn't move or even comprehend what she had just heard. Then the news hit her, and her screams would have woken anyone nearby. She cried and screamed into her pillow for almost an hour before exhaustion set in. She began to regain her senses, realizing she had to tell the kids. But how and when? She needed to call her mom and Rick's parents in Denver. She craved a friend's support but didn't know where to turn. She needed to get to UCDMC immediately but doubted if she could drive. Kelly was in Europe on business, so she couldn't help for a few days. Cindy splashed water on her face, dressed quickly, tied her hair into a ponytail, and headed for the door, just as the doorbell rang. How strange, she thought, so early. It was Brad Stanton, the family lawyer and one of Rick's best friends. He looked devastated. "Cindy, I heard about the accident on the morning news. I'm so sorry." With those words, she collapsed in his arms, sobbing and shaking violently. Brad held her in the doorway for a moment. Just then, Mrs. Bowling came out of her house in her bathrobe, running across the lawn with a concerned look. Cindy was too upset to speak, so Brad filled the void. Mrs. Bowling cried but immediately embraced Cindy, offering comfort. After a few minutes, Cindy insisted on going to the hospital in San Diego. "I have to see him. I have to see my Rick." Brad and Mrs. Bowling agreed that she would watch the kids briefly, tell them where Mom was, and take them to school. They would find out soon enough, but not now. Brad insisted on driving Cindy, and within 5 minutes they were on the road. Cindy's phone started ringing and buzzing with calls and messages from friends. She called her mom, who promised to be on the first flight out. Cindy then broke the news to Rick's parents, Connor and Lily Thomas. They were devastated, but also promised to get the earliest flight. They expected to arrive by the time the kids returned from school. Cindy turned off her phone, looked out at the Pacific Ocean, and started crying again. The next days were a nightmare, explaining to the kids, thanking Grandpa, Grandma, and Mrs. Bowling for their help, talking to authorities and insurance companies. Cindy had 3 separate life insurance policies. Arranging the funeral and managing clients who had booked weddings or family gatherings, the tasks seemed endless. Cindy was also troubled by questions. What was Rick doing an hour out of town on a deserted road so early? While no one called it reckless, he was speeding. The toxicology report showed Rick had had only blood in his system, no booze, pills, or any substances that could impair his driving. The contents of his stomach showed he had eaten steak, salad, and potatoes the night before, drinking only water. Cindy was stunned. Bennett picked up his phone several times to text Cindy but decided against it. He knew she was suffering immensely and realized his message would only make things worse. Lori was in a meeting with a new client when she got the news. Her assistant, Stacy, noticed her pained expression but found it odd that she didn't seem completely shaken. Lori did not attend the funeral. The funeral was held Friday morning, and everyone who knew Rick attended. Cindy was shocked by what people said about him. She knew he was amazing, but hearing story after story, she realized just how loyal, caring, generous, and respectful he was. This made her feel even more desperate, thinking that if she had been more engaged with Rick, her affair with Bennett wouldn't have happened, and Rick would still be alive. She needed to find out just how right she was. Late Sunday afternoon, Brad showed up at the house. He briefly spoke with Cindy's mom and mother-in-law, who immediately took the kids and left. When Cindy came downstairs, she saw Brad at the kitchen table with a peculiar expression. She offered him a drink, which he declined, inviting her to sit. He began, "Cindy, before I convey what I've been instructed to, I have two things to tell you. I'm your friend, but today I'm here as a representative of a client. That client is Rick." Cindy covered her mouth with her hand and gasped. "I say my client is Rick because even though he is dead, I still act as his attorney and handle his legal and financial affairs. The second thing you should know for sure is that I had no idea what was going to happen to Rick." Cindy thought this was strange. How could anyone know what would happen as a result of an accident, or even that an accident would happen? Brad understood her confusion. "Rick told me verbally and in writing that if anything happened to him, I was to honor his wishes. He paid me in full for the work, even though I offered to do it as a friend. He insisted that everything be done legally and properly. I don't know the contents of this note, but I know it is a letter from Rick to you. I've been instructed to deliver it to you and leave immediately before you open and read it." Cindy took the letter from Brad, her hands shaking violently. "What else did he instruct you to do?" she asked. Brad looked a little embarrassed but replied, "I'm sorry, Cindy, but this is confidential information between me and my client. Rick strictly forbade me from giving you any details about our conversations, my duties, and his wishes. Again, I apologize." With those words, Brad got up and left without waiting for Cindy's response. Cindy opened the letter, and Piper reappeared to collect some of his debt. "Cindy, you already know I'm dead and the funeral is over. Brad handed you this note and left. The kids are with my parents and your mom. They know not to come home for a few hours as you will have a hard time processing this. This is the third option, Cindy. It's the best way I could find. I loved you with all my heart, and now that's gone. You've taken it away. I think it's the best thing I can do. 1. You will know that 2 weeks ago I bought 3 acres of land by the lake at Eagle's Nest. It was for this reason that I was driving on Highway 79 where the accident occurred. The thing is, I bought the property because I had been promoted and we were both making good money. It was supposed to be a surprise for you and the kids, a place where we could build and grow during the summer and long weekends. First, of course, it's a scam. Buying real estate is a cover. But whatever you do, you have to stick to it. Insurance companies won't pay a claim if they find anything suspicious about my end of life. I visited the new cottage to do some errands and decided to get up early and go home. I was in a hurry because I had a meeting with a client at 9:30, so I was driving fast and lost control of the car. The insurance companies might do a little digging, but they won't find anything. Brad will take care of it if you stick to the story. 3. As far as insurance goes, I changed my will in the last few weeks. 90% of my money, about $3 billion, will go into a trust fund for the kids. They will be able to get whatever they need to pay for college and grad school if they want. The rest will go to them when they reach age 30 and will be split equally. Brad will take care of those details when the time comes. I'm leaving you 10%, or about $300,000, to hold you over until you start working again in a month or so. I wouldn't leave you anything if my conscience allowed it, but I realize you have to take care of the kids while you pretend to grieve for me, so there's enough for that. First, as for our beautiful children, a while back, I told you about a psychologist's advice that end of life is easier on children than divorce. I did some deep research and found several studies that indicate that this is true. That's why I couldn't divorce you, Cindy. I couldn't do that to my children. I think someday they will find out the truth about everything, and then they might hate me. I hope they don't, and if they do, I hope they have someone to explain to them how unfair life can be sometimes. I'm grateful that now and for the foreseeable future, they can grieve their loss and not have to bear the burden of rejection that comes with divorce. Second, I can't tell you what else to do with your life. I suppose you can go back to Bennett, but there may be someone else you are interested in. Whatever you do, please think of the children first and do what is best for them. They will be leaving home in 9 or 10 years, so maybe you can keep your lovers away until then. Third, finally, I have one small request. When you are done with this note, burn it until there are no ashes left. If the insurance companies find it, it will ruin our children's financial future. Re-rate it a couple more times, but please, if I mean anything to you, burn this note. Don't worry, maybe you'll hear from me again someday. Rick! Cindy cried harder than she ever had before. She collapsed onto the floor, sobbing and wailing, calling out Rick's name, overcome by the weight of her affair's aftermath. She feared it was more than she could handle. After about an hour, she finally gathered enough strength to sit up and reread the note 2 more times. Then, she walked over to the fireplace and burned it until only a small pile of ashes was left. Piper had indeed come on a call, or so she thought. It's been 12 years since Rick Thomas died on California Highway 79. In reality, he died the moment he saw his wife with another man, who betrayed him, their children, and their future. The rest was just details of how and when it happened. Cindy never remarried and kept Rick's end of life a secret. She followed his wishes and used the $300,000 to support the family as they grieved. It took her over a year to go back to work. She tried to adopt a professional persona, but her business focused mainly on weddings and family events, which she found challenging. She worked for an event planning company and made significant career progress in building relationships. She dated occasionally, but never found anyone like Rick. She also saw herself as damaged goods, though counseling helped her cope. She wondered if she met someone new and married again, would she end up cheating? Michael and Sarah urged her to date and find happiness. Dad would want you to be happy, they said. Yes, he always wanted me to be happy, she thought, and I used that to justify destroying him. The pain began to resurface. As for Bennett, about 4 months after Rick's end of life, he felt enough time had passed to send Cindy a note. Lori had observed that they were no longer lovers, but Bennett remained a faithful friend. One morning, he decided to send her a message. It read, "I'm so sorry." A moment later, Cindy replied, "Me too, goodbye." They never spoke again. Michael and Sarah had graduated from high school, were now in their early 20s and attending college. Michael, like his mother, enjoyed the energy of people coming together. He went to the University of Southern California to study hospitality and marketing. Sarah, like her father, was drawn to analytics. She found fulfillment in problem solving and went to Stanford to study economics. Although they were only 8 when their father died, both were deeply affected by his loss. The thought of their father never coming home was a constant presence. But their mom and grandparents worked hard to help them heal and start enjoying life again. Each of them, in their own way, used their father's memory as motivation for their lives. On a warm spring morning, Cindy sat at her desk. In her apartment, she was sipping a cup of hot black coffee while reviewing a new contract for an executive retreat when the doorbell rang. When she opened the door, she was greeted by Brad Stanton. "Brad, it's been months," Cindy said with a smile as she reached out for a hug. "I'm so happy to see you." Brad returned the hug but seemed a bit stiff. "Thank you, Cindy. May I come in and talk with you?" Cindy noticed that there was something formal about his tone. This wasn't just a casual visit from a friend. "Sure, Brad. Can I get you a cup of coffee?" "No, thanks. I can only stay for a few minutes." They sat down at the kitchen table and Brad began. "Cindy, as you know, today would have been Rick's birthday." Cindy flinched. She had completely forgotten that today was April 7th, Rick's birthday. She made a mental note to call the kids as soon as Brad left. As you know, before Rick died, he changed his will and left instructions for what should happen in the event of his end of life. "Cindy, I'll be honest. I knew something was wrong. He wasn't himself, but he didn't want to tell me what was going on. As his friend, I pushed him, but as his lawyer, I had to follow his wishes. He never allowed me to understand what was happening until now." Cindy's eyes widened with surprise and confusion. "What do you mean, Brad?" "Before Rick died, he wrote me a long note that he never gave back to me. This morning, at exactly, there was a loud knock on my door. When I answered it, a courier handed me an envelope from a P.O. box in Austin, Texas. I was a bit annoyed at being woken up so early, but curiosity got the better of me. I went back to my office and opened it. Inside was a 12-page letter from Rick and a short handwritten note from someone named Lori." Cindy began to tremble with a mix of resentment, pain, and memories. Brad continued. The note simply said, "Please read carefully and follow the instructions." I started reading Rick's note. The first line was so typical of Rick. "Hey buddy, get your back out of bed. I need you to help me finish some unfinished business." Yes, I know it's 6 a.m. I told them it was exactly 6 and paid a little extra to make sure they were reliable. I won't detail the rest of the note, Cindy, but I will say that Rick told me everything. The whole 9 yards, in detail. He paused briefly to let her absorb what he'd said and saw tears begin to form in her eyes. "I can't imagine how you could do that to a great guy like Rick, a guy who gave you all his love and devotion, a guy who eventually gave you his life." Brad stood up and finished his business, handing Cindy a white envelope with her name on it. He said, "Cindy, I never want to talk to you again. I will keep in touch with Michael and Sarah because they are my best friends. If I see you at a social function, I'll be polite for their sake, not yours, but don't ever try to contact me. Do you understand?" Cindy could barely get a word out but looked at Brad and replied, "Yes, I understand." With those words, he turned and walked away, but as he left, she heard him mutter, "Selfish goddamn strumpet." The envelope lay on the table, daring her to open it. She recognized the handwriting. It was Rick's. It took a few minutes before she worked up the courage to open it, but she finally did. "Cindy, it's been 12 years since the events that brought us to this morning. In my last letter to you, I mentioned that maybe someday you would hear from me again. Maybe someday the children will know what happened to us and to them. Well, today that day has come. First, when I found out that Lori tried to talk you out of having fun with Bennett, and you ignored her advice, I decided to turn to her for help. She's the only person on the planet who knew of my intentions. She begged and pleaded with me not to do it. She even said that I could take the kids and come to Austin to visit her. Imagine that, a woman of real character. I wish I had met her before I laid eyes on you. Anyway, when I declined to, she agreed to go along with my wishes. Second, my first request was that she keep this note until today, my 45th birthday. On that day, she was to give Brad this note along with a note for him promptly at 6 a.m. The note was to have Brad read my letter and then give it to you. I had a backup plan to get this note to you no matter what, but I hope Brad and Lori are in good health and were able to help me finish the job. Third, this morning, both Michael and Sarah will receive a similar note from me, outlining everything that happened 12 years ago. I haven't left anything out. They are adults. I believe they have the right to know the truth, the whole truth. The statute of limitations on insurance fraud in California is 4 years, so their inheritance is safe. As I mentioned in my previous letter, they may hate me for this, but I'm sure Brad and Lori will help them make sense of what happened. Good luck trying to get rid of the lies you have told your children over the past years. I'm sure if they want to talk to you, they will have more than a few questions. Fourth, if your mom and my parents are still alive, they will receive a similar note as partners in my firm. Fifth, as for Bennett, today's Santa Barbara News Press will publish a full-page memo about his machinations with you. It details how the two of you planned and created amazing wedding events while you cheated on me, and he entertained a married woman. The article ends by urging people to seek help elsewhere. I may not be able to destroy him, but I hope it will make his life miserable for a while. Maybe you two can get together, if you haven't already, and have some good fun to ease the pain. By the way, you are named specifically in the article, so some friends and coworkers may have questions for you as well. Sixth, Cindy, almost years ago, I thought we were as happy and content with each other as any couple could be. It all turned out to be a lie. A tragic lie. So Cindy, you've picked the tune, you've enjoyed the dance, and now it's time to pay the bill in full. Rick. Moments after Cindy read Rick's note, her phone began to ring off the hook. 6 months later, all 3 BD properties were sold at a big loss to the owner, an Austin-based investment group, the Templeton Group. Davis, at age 53, was financially ruined.